Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. We're here at the final roundup of 2022. This is the albums I've just been listening to this last December. So let's go in and get started. First one up is Pom Poko's Cheater, a second album from this Norwegian kind of power pop, noise pop group. And I really love this band's outstanding melodic sense. The lead singer has this kind of very sweet quality to her voice, and it kind of does recall to a degree kind of cutissimo Japanese singers. And I would kind of set them on the spectrum between Deerhoof due to their kind of aggressive, angular, experimental side, with almost like the Cardigans, because they have this very sweet and pop-oriented side to their music as well. I would categorize Cheater as addictive listening. It's got these smart, elegant songs with their great melodic sense, but with really clever arrangements that really add to the replayability of the song. And as I've had in rotation this last month, its tendrils have started to get out. I've noticed my kids singing these tunes, so I think it's pretty accessible to a broad range of folks. Next up I got Sudan Archives' Natural Brown Prom Queen. Sudan Archives is the nom de plume of Brittany Parks, who is a self-taught violinist who really found her voice on the instrument when she was exposed to Northeastern African music, hence the name, Sudan Archives. And that kind of gave her a very unique and distinctive approach to the instrument. Now, if you're saying all this, you're going to get the impression this is like a world music or ethno music album, and it's definitely not. This album is what I would call more like experimental R&B. And it's come up on a lot of end-of-year top 20 lists, and with very good reason. This album really grabbed my attention initially due to the really interesting textures and sounds that it uses. There's a whole lot of threads you could pull on this project in many different directions, as far as just where she gets her influences from, how she was actually technically taught, and what she's trying to express in her music as far as her positioning within those extremes. But in spite of that, there's so much musically going on in this album. It's layered and it's textured and it's aggressive, has a very, very strong message to it, and I think it's super, super successful and really deserves a lot of the critical acclaim that it's gotten. Next up I got Wu Lu's Loggerhead. Wu Lu is the stage name for Miles Roman Hopcraft. Trying to pin down exactly what this album is probably not so easy. It's almost like it'd be like a grunge hip hop album, but it never really is one of those two things. It kind of has a soundscape that's reminiscent of like Soundgarden, maybe Alice in Chains very often, but also has smoother and more hip hoppy sections. And then on the other side, he has an almost punk rock attitude towards his singing that veers into the more rhythmic side of hip hop, but never really lands on any of those things.
The same feeling of nostalgia just puts my brain in the rain. My couple brains will only exist if my mind goes insane. 'Cause I know that life is real, but I live it by the hill. And I try to figure who we are, but the mirror never can.
If there's going to be one artist I could really frame this within, I would say he reminds me a lot of POS. POS is an artist I checked out a couple years ago who is a rap artist who has a very strong background in live punk music, and I think that's a crossover for this one. Next up I got Karate's The Bed is in the Ocean. Karate was a band I kind of found out about the old-fashioned way. I discovered them by walking through Waterloo Records about, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago, and heard them over the loudspeaker, and the sound of the band caught my attention so much I actually had to go up to the clerk and say, "Who is this? I need to find out more about them." Karate is a trio of musicians who, if you were gonna take the post-punk of Fugazi and consider what it would sound like if jazz studies majors were playing it, and that group was sort of really trying to mine the similarities, the common ground between post-punk and jazz, that would kind of be where you're headed with Karate. They do have songs, don't get me wrong, but the songs have this very loose and improvised feel. Vocal approach has a very kind of free and improvisational feel to it, almost like a real fed-up Ben Folds.
Okay. 'Cause I can't take the shame. And I'll be happy when my friends don't go. When we're in this town for good, I'll know.
Karate has a kind of a crossover for me a little bit with Rush in a way, even though Rush doesn't have a very strong jazz component to what they're doing. But like Rush, the instrumental side of the band is as important as everything else that happens. And again, their jazz training betrays them very often because they go off on these kind of solo tangents and bring it back, and it has a very improvisational feel to it. And a very stripped down feel. It's clearly like almost a jazz trio. There's not really many overdubs. It's just guitar, bass, and drums. There's no rhythm guitar. They just take things where they go. And I find that really appealing. Okay, next up I got Schnellertollermeier's 5. Great name, which is actually the combination of the three guys in the group. Schneller, Toller, Myers. And also kind of like Karate, the trio of guys with a pretty strong musical training in their background, but they're not quite as concerned as spilling over into accessibility with songs. This is more of like a straight up kind of a math rock group. If you like Battles, if you like Toe, if you like Light, that kind of thing, you're going to find a lot to like here. What I do like about Schnellertollermeier, I think that it's a little bit different, a little bit of a take on what other math rock that I've heard does, is they try really hard to invert the importance and the use of the instruments very often. For example, rather than drums being very heavy 2 and 4, drums are very light, almost lilting on top. And the bass parts, of course, the bass is playing the bass parts, but also leans very heavily on high harmonics. Lots of rhythmic play with harmonics on the bass. And then the guitar parts are very deep and angular. So they're constantly trying to invert the importance of the instruments, it feels like, usually to really great effect. And again, if you're fans of like rock and opposition or math rock, you're going to get looped into this really quickly. The things that is great examples of what's great about that style, Schnellertollermeier do really well. Sometimes their jams go a little bit long, but they're trying to be on the search of sort of this ecstatic release that's potentially possible in math rock. It's sort of more like what you see in a post-rock setting. But it's a lot of fun, and I get off on these kinds of things with the really wacky cross rhythms, and it's a really great example of that style of music. And finally, I got Tony Molina's In the Fade. In the Fade got quite a bit of critical recognition at one point during this year, just for the sheer genius in their minds of Tony Molina's writing style. He's a pop songwriter, and I will definitely go with him on the beautiful, ornate side of his compositions for these songs. And to be honest, he has a really great kind of straight ahead 90s, post-grunge Weezer-y style going on. The two these things coexist very well on these songs on In the Fade.
Everyone's so bad except for you. You can't accept the blame now, and that's no lie. Oh, but everyone you know then wonder why.
But here's my problem with In the Fade. All the songs on In the Fade are less than 2 minutes long. Most of them are hang around at about the 1 minute and 30 second mark. So even though these songs have these really great ingenious parts, by the time you get to the end of it, I feel like they just kind of end. They don't feel satisfying to me at that length. Even though the material is great. I love a lot of the music happening here. The instrumental side of what he's doing is great. The songs are killer. It's very melodically memorable. I just need a little bit more beef in them just to the end. I played a little while with the idea of maybe this is like a progressive rock album and these are all just like little movements, but I couldn't quite convince myself that was a way to listen to it. Anyway, that's what I got for you guys this month at the end of 2022. Last roundup for this year. These will be listed as the part of the 2022 playlist, but they'll be considered for 2023 best of at the end of the year. I've also started a Patreon page, so if you want to look for ways that maybe you can support what I'm doing, please check out the link in my comments and go check that out. But until see you next time, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.